until I ran into Dad's old attorney one day. He looked surprised when I mentioned the will. "I thought your dad updated that," he said. "Didn't he decide to split the estate between you and David?" That one sentence unraveled everything. Everything seemed to settle down after Dad's funeral. David, as always, took charge, managing the paperwork, closing accounts, selling Dad's old car, and telling me everything had been handled according to the will. I didn't question it. I was still grieving. And honestly, I trusted him. He was my older brother. Why wouldn't I? Then, about 3 months later, something happened that changed everything. I ran into Mr. Jensen, Dad's longtime attorney, at a local library event. We exchanged small talk for a bit, and I mentioned, somewhat offhandedly, that Dad had left everything to David. I expected a nod, maybe a polite response, but instead his brow furrowed. "Everything?" he asked slowly. "I thought your father updated his will recently, to split the estate between you two." My heart stopped. "No," I said. "David didn't mention anything like that. He said Dad's will hadn't changed." Mr. Jensen paused, clearly uneasy. "Well, last I saw your father, about 2 years before he passed, he was adamant about updating everything. He wanted things to be fair. We drew up a new will, had it notarized, and he signed it in my office." I just stood there staring at him. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my head, but none of them landed. I could barely breathe. "There was a new will?" I managed to say. "Yes," he nodded. "We finalized it, and per his instructions, I sent the signed copy to David. I kept a digital version in our archive, just in case. But I never heard anything back." I left the event in a daze. The drive home felt like a blur. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. If Mr. Jensen was right, if a new will existed, then David had lied. Worse, he'd stolen what wasn't his. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I combed through every email, every text David had sent me after Dad's death. They were clean, polite, efficient. Too efficient. No mention of any decisions, just statements. "Dad left everything to me. It's all on the will. I'll handle it." It hit me. This wasn't an oversight. It was a choice, a deliberate one. Why would he do that? Money? Power? Or did he just assume I'd never push back? I thought about all the times growing up when David got the bigger slice of everything. Attention, praise, support. I was the one who kept quiet, who didn't complain. Was that what he still counted on? A part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation. Maybe he didn't realize the new will mattered. Maybe there was a mix-up. But deep down, I knew. David had received that will, and he chose to pretend it didn't exist. He didn't think I'd fight. He was wrong. I waited a few days before saying anything to David, mostly because I wasn't sure how. How do you ask your own brother if he stole your inheritance? But I needed answers, so I called him. He picked up after the second ring, cheerful as ever. "Hey sis," he said, "everything okay?" There was a long pause on my end. Then I said, "I ran into Mr. Jensen." Silence. I continued. "He told me Dad updated his will, that it splits everything 50-50. He said he sent you a copy." David exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I got it. And you didn't tell me because—" Another pause. "Because Dad changed his mind," he said finally. "He told me he regretted updating it. He said you didn't need the money." I stood in my kitchen, phone to my ear, feeling my stomach twist. "You realize that's not how wills work, right?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Once it's signed and notarized, it's legally binding." "He didn't file it officially," David replied, "so it doesn't count." That's when I realized he wasn't sorry. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was just hoping I'd never find out. "You hit a valid will," I said, "and used an old one to take everything." "I didn't take anything you needed," he snapped. "You're doing fine. You've got a job, no debt, a paid-off car. You're not struggling." My jaw clenched. "So that gives you the right to erase me from Dad's final wishes." He didn't respond. "I want what Dad intended," I said quietly. "Nothing more, nothing less." "You're not seriously going to make this a legal issue, are you?" David asked, voice tight. I didn't answer, because in that moment I already knew the answer. The next week I met with a probate attorney. I brought what little evidence I had, emails, the timeline, my conversation with Mr. Jensen. She was calm and professional, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "This isn't uncommon," she said, "but it's ugly, and it's going to get worse before it gets better." She reached out and touched my hand gently. "Are you ready for that?" I didn't answer right away, because no, I wasn't ready. Who's ever ready to go to court against their own family? But I was tired of being the quiet one, the easy one, the one who never made a fuss. And I couldn't let this slide, not after everything Dad had taught me about fairness and doing the right thing. So I said, let's do it. When David was served with the court notice, he didn't call, he didn't text, he didn't say a word. But Mom did. She left me a voicemail. She sounded shaken. "How could you take your brother to court?" she said. "After everything we've been through? After your father's death?" Then came the guilt trip. "You always had more than enough. David needed it more. He's starting over. He's family. You don't sue family." I listened in silence. Then I deleted the message. Word spread quickly through the extended family. Some supported me quietly. A few sent messages saying they understood. Most didn't say anything at all. But the silence was louder than words. At night I lay awake questioning everything. Was I really doing the right thing? Was it worth tearing apart what little family I had left? Then I'd think of Dad. How he always said what's right isn't always easy, but it's still right. And I'd find my answer again. By the time the first court hearing arrived, I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally. But I walked into that courtroom with my head held high, because even if I lost the case, I knew I'd done something I'd never done before. I stood up for myself, and there was no going back. The courtroom was cold, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. It was the kind of place where everything echoed, every step, every breath, every uncomfortable silence. David sat on the other side of the room, staring straight ahead. He wouldn't look at me. I tried not to look at him either. I sat with my attorney, hands clenched in my lap. The judge, a woman in her 60s, calm and measured, entered. We all rose. This wasn't some dramatic courtroom scene from TV. It was quiet, methodical, almost sterile. But to me, it felt like the most emotional place in the world. My lawyer presented the updated will. Mr. Jensen testified via video call, confirming everything, the date it was signed, the notary present, Dad's clear intentions. The judge listened, taking notes, asking a few questions. Then it was David's turn. He said the new will didn't matter, that Dad had changed his mind, verbally, before he passed, that I didn't need my share. He even pulled out a printed email, one Dad supposedly sent, saying he wanted David to have full control of the estate. The judge looked at the email for a moment, then asked, "Do you have the original message with the email header?" David blinked. No, just the printed version." The judge nodded slowly but didn't say more. The next day, we returned for closing remarks. My attorney stood and said, "This is not about money. This is about a man's final wishes. Put in writing, signed, notarized, and witnessed. A will isn't a suggestion. It's a legal document, and this one was ignored, hidden, and overridden without cause." David's lawyer tried to argue that the old will was still valid, that no one had formally revoked it, but it didn't hold much weight. The judge asked one final question. "Mr. David, did you receive a copy of the updated will when it was sent by Mr. Jensen's office?" David hesitated. "Yes," he admitted, "but I didn't think it was official." The courtroom went still. My heart thudded in my chest. The judge adjourned for lunch. When she returned, she read her decision out loud. "The court finds that the updated will is valid and legally binding. Mr. David intentionally failed to disclose its existence and acted in bad faith." She ordered David to return my rightful share of the estate, including interest. He was also responsible for covering a portion of my legal fees. Just like that, it was over. But it didn't feel like a victory. Outside the courthouse, I stood alone on the steps. People passed by, cars drove past, life went on. But for me, something fundamental had shifted. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt numb. Because the truth is, winning against your own brother doesn't feel good, even when you're right. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't call friends or post anything online. I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and stared into the dark. The money would come later, through probate processing. What mattered more was that the truth had been acknowledged, that my father's wishes had been honored. But I also knew something had been lost, something I couldn't get back. Trust. Family. That quiet sense of safety you think will always be there. I didn't hear from David, not a call, not an apology, not even a text. Mom sent one message. "I hope you're happy now." I didn't respond. Because the truth is, I wasn't happy, but I was at peace. And for the first time in my life, I had stood my ground. I didn't just fight for a share of the estate. I fought for my voice, for fairness, for closure. And even though it cost me something deep, I knew I did the right thing. After the court decision, I thought I'd feel relief or maybe a sense of justice. But mostly, I just felt empty. It was a quiet kind of emptiness, not loud or dramatic, just this slow, hollow ache that settled in my chest and wouldn't leave. I wasn't celebrating. There were no victory dinners, no champagne, just silence. A week after the ruling, a check arrived from the estate, my portion. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. It was a sizable amount, more than I'd ever had in my bank account at once. And yet, it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like compensation for something I could never truly replace. I deposited the check, then I sat in my car and cried. Not out of joy, not even out of sadness. It was grief, raw, overdue grief. For my dad, for my family, for the version of life I thought I had. I didn't hear from David. Nothing. Not a phone call, not an apology, not even a line of text. I guess part of me had still hoped he might come around, that maybe, just maybe, he'd acknowledge what happened, say he was sorry, say he didn't mean to hurt me. But that never came. What did come was a flood of silence, thick, heavy, final. Mom, on the other hand, sent me another message. I raised you to be kind, not like this. That was it, one sentence, and it shattered me in a different way. Because I wanted to scream, I was kind. For years, I kept quiet, I stepped aside, I trusted you all, and when I finally stood up for myself, I became the villain? I didn't reply. I saved the message, read it once, then deleted it. The rest of the family kept their distance, some out of discomfort, some out of judgment. A few sent awkward texts, hope you're doing okay, but I knew what they really meant was, we don't want to get involved. It was lonely, really lonely. I started avoiding events, skipped birthdays, stopped answering group chats. The isolation wasn't forced, it just happened. And in a strange way, it gave me space to feel, to think, to breathe. Eventually, I decided to use part of the inheritance to do something for myself. I bought a small house. Nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom place with creaky floors and a tiny front yard, but it was mine. I chose the paint. I planted flowers. I hung wind chimes on the porch. For the first time in years, I felt safe, not because everything was okay, but because I was finally building something that was mine. No secrets, no guilt, no manipulation. I also started therapy. At first, it felt weird, like I was talking to a stranger about things that should have stayed in the family. But slowly, one afternoon, my therapist asked, if you could go back, would you do anything differently? I sat there for a long time, then said yes, I would have stood up for myself sooner. I'm not healed, not completely. Some wounds don't close neatly. They just stop bleeding. But I'm healing, and there's a big difference between the two. I'm learning how to live with the loss, of trust, of connection, of the family I thought I had. And I'm learning how to build something better in its place. Not perfect, not painless, but honest and mine. If you've made it this far in the story, thank you. I don't share this to gain sympathy. I share it because maybe, just maybe, you felt the same. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who were supposed to love you the most. But that doesn't mean you stay silent. You're allowed to speak up, to draw a line, to protect your peace. Even if it costs you something, even if it costs you everything. It's been more than a year since the court ruled in my favor. A full year since I walked out of that cold courtroom with shaking hands and a quiet victory. Since the last time I heard my mother's voice. Since I gave up expecting an apology that was never coming. A lot can happen in a year, and a lot didn't. David never reached out. No call, no message, not even a text to say, I didn't mean to hurt you. I stopped waiting. That part of me, the one who kept hoping for repair, for understanding, for something like reconciliation, eventually grew quiet, and in its place came something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness. Not happiness, not closure in the way the movies show it, just stillness. I thought closure would feel like a finish line, like I'd wake up one day and feel whole again, but that's not how it works. Not really. Closure isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or hugs or neatly tied endings. It shows up in small ways, like the first time you go a whole day without thinking about the person who hurt you, like being able to walk past a place that once triggered memories and feel nothing at all, like breathing deeply and realizing you're not carrying their weight anymore. That's what closure looked like for me. I started building a quiet life. I used part of my inheritance to buy a home. Nothing fancy, but everything I needed. 2 bedrooms, creaky hardwood floors, a kitchen with just enough light in the mornings to make coffee feel like a ceremony. I planted flowers in the front yard, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. At first, it felt silly. Who was I planting them for? But soon I realized it was for me, for the version of me that had spent so long trying to earn space in someone else's life. Now, I was growing something in my own. The loneliness didn't disappear overnight. Some days, it hit me like a wave, usually around holidays. Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, my dad's birthday. That's when the memories would rush in. Not just of what happened, but of everything that came before it. The good parts, the laughter, the Sunday pancakes Dad used to make, the way David used to playfully tease me, the long drives with Mom where we didn't even need to talk. Grief is complicated like that. It wraps the good and bad together and asks you to carry both. And I did. But I carried them differently now. Therapy helped more than I expected. I used to think therapy was just for people who were broken. But what I learned is that it's also for people who are just tired. Tired of carrying stories alone. Tired of pretending things didn't hurt. My therapist didn't try to fix me. She listened. She held space for my anger, for my guilt, for the shame I didn't even realize I was still holding. And slowly, I began letting go. Of the belief that speaking up made me a bad daughter. Of the guilt for not being easier or more forgiving. Of the pressure to keep a broken family illusion intact. One afternoon in early spring, I got a letter. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. It was from David. The letter was short, barely half a page. I know I hurt you. I'm not ready to talk about everything yet, but I think about it more than you know. I hope one day you'll believe that I wasn't trying to erase you, I just didn't know how to handle any of it. No, I'm sorry. No request to reconnect. Just a quiet offering. I read it 3 times, folded it, placed it in a drawer, and I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness, not out of spite, but because I didn't need to anymore. I had already found what I needed. You see, healing didn't come from fixing my relationship with David or Mom. It came from fixing the relationship I had with myself, from forgiving myself for trusting the wrong people, from trusting myself again to make the right choices, from recognizing that what happened to me wasn't my fault, but what I did next, that was mine, and I chose truth, I chose boundaries, I chose peace. If you've listened to my story this far, I want to say thank you. I didn't share it for sympathy. I shared it for anyone out there who's still sitting in silence, still trying to make peace with things they never asked for, still carrying a grief no one else sees. You are not alone, and you don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need to be the good daughter, the easy sibling, the one who swallows every hurt to keep the family calm. You get to choose truth. You get to choose yourself, even if no one claps when you do, even if it breaks something first. Sometimes, that's where real healing begins.